We're so glad to have you back here at the Center for Faculty Development. I'm excited about this panel we're having today for preparing for promotion and tenure. We're going to record this because some new faculty teach at this time, as you can imagine. There's Matt. Coming on in.
We have the Hazel. That's
I'm just going to introduce the panel, and then I'm going to let them get on with what our topic is. So we have Jennifer Reagan. She's from Biological Sciences. Beth Tennant from Nursing, Jamie Foster from Marketing, Bernd Schroeder. I was like, I just want to say, yeah. From Math, Julie Hammond from Dance, Matt Casey from History, and then the panel is moderated by Eric Tribunal, Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences.
Well, welcome everyone. So I'm going to ask some questions of our panelists. They're going to respond, and then we're going to leave hopefully plenty of time at the end for you all to ask questions about tenure and promotion processes. So I'm going to keep my eye on the clock as we move through some questions. So the first for the panel is if you would talk about when faculty should start thinking about tenure and promotion.
Day one. Day one. The day you sign your contract. You cannot think about that too soon.
And so what does that look like on day one, or now we are about 6 months in? What does it look like to be thinking about tenure and promotion at this point?
I would recommend to just keep adequate records without sweating the details. In my second academic life, we had a meeting like that just with our dean, and he started with the words, when you're preparing your tenure application, it should be like you're applying for another job. Of course, everybody laughed because we knew what he was talking about. He didn't want to get rid of us, but it is something that we have to take seriously. At the same time, it's just a lot of what I would call reflexes. Keep your CV up to date. I mean, anytime something good happens to me, it doesn't take that long, and make it part of the celebration to put that into my CV. In terms of record keeping, if it's something that you think that should go into a dossier, like documentation of refereeing activities and the like, just print a PDF and make a folder. You've got annual teaching evaluations. Make a folder, put those teaching evaluations in there. And then also the student teaching evaluations that you can download. When you want to take a look at those anyway, it's good food for thought. Well, get it as a PDF, put it into a folder.
I may want to come back to the idea of what to be thinking about very early on in terms of tenure and promotion, but since Bernd has taken us down the documenting
It's a rabbit hole, yes.
What other strategies do the panelists have for preserving documents that you will later need for tenure and promotion dossiers?
I just want to say one thing before we say that. To me, on day one, you need to know your criteria. You have to have that in front of you and know exactly what your school wants from you. How many publications, how many books. Because I'm in nursing, I know ours, but you need to know that criteria, and that's all I'll say about that. But that's because that will guide you on what you need in document-wise. What is the criteria? What will prove service? What will prove this? Because that's what you're doing. You can't just have it in your CV. You have to document proof. I was old school. I printed everything and put it in a file. I was one of the last groups. We had to submit it both, and now it's completely electronic. So I may not be the best one to answer that, but I just scanned all mine. I kept it as one document and scanned it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good, because I'm on the teaching track, and the first time I found out that I was supposed to be keeping all of this was like a week before I was supposed to submit the dossier. So I would suggest, record keeping, but at this point, the way it's submitted, it should be scanned. You need to have digital copies of anything that you would want to put in that dossier.
I'll tag onto that as well and say that it's okay, it's acceptable to have a conversation with your director or your chair very quickly to just ask any questions that you might have within your discipline, and also to have that important conversation about, making sure that you're protected so that you have space to do your research, that you're not too overloaded on service or teaching, in balance with developing your dossier. It's something to keep an eye out for. But to just ask their opinion. I know that when I went through that process, I just looked at a lot of other dossiers that had been successfully submitted and just looked through them when I came to that point of getting really serious about mine, and that was really helpful. It was really helpful.
Yeah, I think getting it in mind what it should look like or what it's going to look like in the end can kind of get you in the right frame of mind.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in an ideal situation, you do those things that made you appealing to the search committee in the first place. You have this research agenda that inspires you, and you want to ensure that that's consistent with what's also going to get you tenure. And if there's any kind of disconnect where you might be interested in this, but it doesn't match the departmental standards, the earlier you can strategize that, the better. And, you know, depending on where you are in your career, you're going to have more people, especially within but also outside the university, asking you to do stuff, to peer review journal articles and manuscripts and things like that. And I got in the habit of, when I would get that kind of call, which would be time consuming and possibly useful and just in terms of kind of showing my service to the field, I just had a colleague that I trusted, and I would say, here's the press, not super well known, but I think I could do a turnaround. What's your read on this? You know, and try not to commit to things on the spot, wait a day and then respond, especially if you're going to take on a big project. But the more time you have, the more you can strategize about how can I do something that I care about that also is consistent with what my department and university require. And so, I mean, that's strategizing, which you should be doing anyway for research. Just one of the variables that you throw into that should involve tenure standards.
Grant, you look like you were going to say something.
Well, and in some ways, I mean, there's the challenge with how do you balance everything versus what are all the things that you really ought to do as somebody in academia. I mean, we have 3 phases, and I think most academicians go into academia because we really like our research, and academia is the one place where you can continue your research in probably the least restricted environment. In some cases, it might be the only environment in which you can continue your research. And we're really attached to that, but we cannot sacrifice the other 2 phases on the altar even of highly funded research. And that's where it becomes challenging, because I would not want us as an institution and you with yourself to socialize ourselves into an environment where up until point X you're supposed to avoid certain things like the plague. Point X is tenure, and then after X comes Y, right, which is promotion to full professor. And if up until that point you were always able to avoid all sorts of things, then somebody in my chair cannot be surprised when after you've done all those things, you really wonder why you should do them. And yet it is the teaching and the service that are also important to keep an institution in business. The challenge really is, how do you get it all done within 24 hours and are still able to, I don't know, eat, sleep, and do all these inessential things?
So given the sometimes competing demands between research or creative activity and teaching and service, which you're saying that the ideal tenure and promotion candidate is someone who has demonstrated success in all of those areas. How does someone on the teaching track or the tenure track kind of navigate those competing demands or figure out how to achieve some balance? What's some practical ideas for the whole panel about how we can demonstrate success in each of those areas?
I have a kind of a corny, quick answer to that. It took me, now I didn't achieve this before tenure, but I did use this to guide me towards full promotion to professor. And that is, do only what only you can do in the area of research. And I married that to what I was really passionate about, right? It's kind of like your dad's advice. Don't do it just for the money, because then it won't be good enough, right? And I think we can't lose track of that. Like, what really gets you excited, or where do you really see a need within your field? And then coupling that with a very honest examination of what you excel at, and building that up. With a bit of, I was a bit unapologetic. In fact, we're talking about tenure and promotion guidelines. My area didn't really fit within our department, so I got pushy asking for it to expand to make space for the work that I was doing. because it was so important to me that if I couldn't do it here, I was gonna do it somewhere else, and I'm really glad I do it here. But I think that's the kind of passion that should be in higher ed, where we don't do what we do because we want to hold on to a job, we do it because we want to change our field. And so I would say let those two things lead. You should be an original.
Yeah.
So one of the problems that I find myself in is that if something doesn't have a due date at the end of the week, it's really easy for it to not get done. And so as difficult as it can be, sometimes I have to force myself to do my writing first, so that way I still have energy. And it got to the point, this is a micro suggestion, I'm not that you have to do it, but I found it very useful to come in to work at 5 and work till 8 a.m. and I could do all my writing uninterrupted, and then I could sit in all the meetings about parking spots and advising the whole rest of the day, and it was fine because I had already done my writing, and so that worked with my, sort of my energy levels, my household, all those kind of infinite number of competing demands. And so there's no specific one way to do it, but I have found that it's counterintuitive to do the things that don't have the quick due date first, but you kind of have to, right? Because the other stuff somehow gets done, right? And if it doesn't, then you have bigger problems. But the lesson plan will happen, the grading will occur. Of course, you want to do justice to those, but if you don't at least give yourself a little bit of time in the morning, it doesn't have to be at 5 a.m., then sometimes things will just keep getting pushed back, and then you look back and 2 months have passed and you haven't touched your stuff. So
Those early hours are magical for admin too, just to kind of check all that stuff off the list. And then you can be really present with your students as well when they come your way.
Very specific budgeting of time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody's calling you.
And in terms of details, ultimately you'll find out what works for you. I can agree with the folks to my left here that for me the morning hours are the ones when I'm most precise. But I've also found out that in the evening I'm more creative. I start losing my inhibitions and write down all sorts of mathematics, most of which I have to throw away in the morning because it's wrong. But for a long time in my career, the evening was when I generated ideas, and then I just wrote them down very quickly and didn't do anything precisely and did the rest of the checking in the morning, and every so often something stuck. The interesting thing there also is that sometimes these other tasks that take time away, I think, I hope that's one of the reasons, can then also help with your research because it resets your mind. I will always say this is the best job I've ever had. It's also the hardest job I've ever had. But I think one of the reasons why I've been doing well with my mathematics is because I've got all the administrative stuff that I have to deal with. Maybe don't tell that to people because they might, but yeah, but it is something where the time that is being taken away, as long as it doesn't totally frazzle you, can also help because you got a more fresh start.
I feel that way about my children.
I've
love
got those
my-
too, yeah.
I love my kids, but I love coming to work sometimes and getting rid of them. And I love my work, but sometimes I like to walk out of here so I can go see my kids, yeah? I agree with that.
And I think there's no perfect balance, and if you think there isn't sacrifice, there will be sacrifice. I know I found that over Christmas, when everybody else was off, I was up early in the morning while they were sleeping, and I was doing things that I needed to do, publications and things like that. There were weekends, there were times that I would be writing the grant, and it just is sacrifice. I don't want you to think that you can accomplish this and work 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. It's not, I don't know, maybe just for me, but it wouldn't work. So I think you'll have to find that you will have to sacrifice some time. You can't do everything you have been doing. I just don't see how you can, but maybe I'm just a phenomenon, but I couldn't. It was a lot of sacrifice of family time to get this done. The other suggestion on time, and then I know we need to move on, don't let yourself get sucked into a vortex. There'll be something that goes along, and it's just, I lost an entire summer with that. Don't get sucked into things. Learn to say no or I can't help you now. I think that's what they're trying to teach us to say. But just don't get sucked into things that you don't have to be sucked into. And like you were saying, guard, you have to be your advocate. You have to be your advocate to guard your time. You just
Sometimes you may need help guarding your time.
Yes,
So
yes.
maybe another micro suggestion is to think about mentors or even program coordinator or directors who may be able to help you navigate some of those conflicting demands, or to give you some advice. So we get asked to do things all the time. You may get asked to, I don't know, review a book manuscript or two in one semester, or to become a book review editor for a journal, or what kinds of things. Take on administrative work, or help a colleague redesign a course. We're constantly getting asked to do these kinds of tasks. And you may not be entirely sure whether you should say yes to them or not. And so that's a good opportunity maybe to seek some advice from a mentor, from an administrator, someone who can help you figure that out.
Agreed.
I want to circle back around really quickly to the idea of preserving documents. So we heard the one old-fashioned way was to have a drawer or a file where you just stick things in, and sometimes you still have to do that because we have paper that has to get scanned eventually. But now I'm thinking maybe we need some kind of electronic filing system where we're dropping in copies of documents now, knowing that the dossier eventually will be electronic. And it's something to think about now in terms of keeping those files, so you don't have to 5 years from now go hunt for them, which is a nightmare.
Well, and remember, digital measures is really great for keeping track of all that stuff as well. I'm playing around with that right now myself.
And in fact, along those lines, I was going to suggest thinking about the annual review process as a way of preserving materials for later promotion and tenure dossiers. So if you submit thorough annual review documents and materials, some of your work might be done for you already when you go to submit your tenure and promotion dossiers later. Different departments have different styles for how they want those annual review materials presented, but if you keep those documents neatly organized and comprehensive, it might be a matter of just assembling them later when you have to submit your promotion and tenure dossier.
And it takes much longer to assemble it than you think. So you can't start too soon on that as you approach, whether it's third year or the formal.
It's
It
like
takes,
editing a book. It's an editing process.
takes more than you think.
And for me, email in theory is always there and searchable, and yet but in practice it can be very difficult to find things. And so if a student writes you a very kind email at the end of the semester, either print it or print it and save it as a PDF, partly because it's nice to throw a few of those into your dossiers, and also if you're having a bad day, pull out your little emails, read a couple, and remind yourself why you're doing this, which we're laughing, but y'all know how it is. So, and for me, the emails are the most difficult to find. So if a journal says, hey, can you contribute an issue on this? Print out the ask. And so that way you just have it, right? And so that way, even if it's in progress, you say, here's something demonstrable, but I'm still drafting the piece. But so because you're essentially responsible for presenting your own kind of evidence. And so that can be whatever you want it to be in order to kind of meet those standards.
What I've started recently, since I was so old school, I have on my files, on my email, it says P&T. And I shoot any email from a student, anything that I think would be evidence to go up, it goes in that file so that I can file it. Because my file management prior to this was just keep every email possible and then just search. That was I'm sorry, that was. But anyway, I do have a P&T file now on my email where I can click and put stuff right over there right now.
So I mentioned the annual review process as a way of thinking about preserving records later for tenure and promotion. But for the panel, what do we suggest that faculty take from the annual review evaluation and process in terms of thinking about tenure and promotion later?
Well, I'll talk about the student evals. First of all, drink heavily before you read them.
Okay.
It's really true. Sometimes because it's emotional grading, right? So you'll have, I really feel that way. I think the kids, the commentary is emotional grading. You can dismiss the most glowing one and dismiss the one where they're really upset with you, and then kind of look in the middle. I am really reliant on student evals to help me know how to be a good teacher, more than somebody coming into my classroom or knowing what, effective teaching is. I know if I'm hitting the mark with my particular students in my particular field if they tell me that I'm doing all right. And so I would say, as difficult as those might be, I always reflected on those. We have a committee in our department called the Student Advisory Committee, and that's where the students just come in and they complain. And we kind of sift out, what really matters and what is just a feeling because it's hard and we're all frustrated and we all work too hard and we're tired. But I would say, look at those and let those guide you in terms of how you disseminate to those students.
I agree with that a lot, because it is very tough to read through those, but if you do kind of step back, you will hear what you need to hear from your students. And I've made so many adjustments
Yes.
to my teaching from just one little part of an evaluation, and keep records of those changes, especially teaching staff, our teaching faculty. We need to, kind of keep up with how we're changing and what improvements we're making, because that's what we're here for. And so that, if you can show that progress of hearing your student and adjustments that you've made and any evidence that it's been effective, that's important too.
Jennifer, could you follow up with other ways that we can demonstrate teaching success when it comes time for promotion?
Well, one thing that is new to me is the peer evaluation. I think that was an interesting experience for me, to have someone come in and just evaluate what I was doing and give me feedback and what they see from a different perspective. So the peer evaluation was very helpful. I think just being able to track improvements in your student success over semesters is important as well.
When you say track student success, do you mean?
DFWI rates is something that we focus on right now with in my courses. If you can address those and see any changes in the DFWI rates.
You want to say what that is, just in case everybody
Just
doesn't
the
know.
rates of Ds, F, withdrawals, and incompletes in your course. So that's how we've been tracking it in my courses lately.
So not all units require peer evaluation, so one option might be to ask a colleague if they'd be willing to come in and observe your class and talk to you about it, and then perhaps write something up. So even if it's not required or built into your school's process, you can always ask. I've been asked to do that. I think most people would be very happy to come in and observe your session.
And I guess something very simple in terms of course design, and that's really independent of career stage. If you're teaching a new course, ask somebody who's taught the course before if they're willing to share their syllabus and share their exams. You don't have to do it that way, but it'll give you an idea how it was done, and you can then make a conscious decision whether you want to do that or something else.
I think also in terms of teaching, though I'm not on a teaching track, we still have to prove our teaching as
Most
well.
definitely.
If you serve on a curriculum committee or curriculum design, or you developed a new course or started a new course, even if it wasn't new but it was new for you, keeping all that information proves, and that's what I did. I included case studies I created, I included my syllabi, I included when I started new technology, like, I put in there that I had started VCM and I was able to demonstrate that I used virtual simulation, that I used other technology. So it just depends on, I don't know everybody's professions or their academic units, but you do have to prove everything that you say. I think that's the thing. You've got to have a document. If you say you did this, there's got to be a document. If you say you did this, there's got to be some kind of documentation. Now, it can be as informal as an email. Beth, please serve on the curriculum committee. Please serve on this subcommittee. Please do this. Your expertise leads me to this. Can you answer this question? All those things count. You can't have too much of that. Can you all add to any other?
Well, here's where then the identity of the unit really comes in, and so what I'm going to say now is my personal viewpoint that I hope will track through, at least through my school, and that is, when we're looking at research, if you're teaching a 1-and-1, I will need to have higher expectations than if you're teaching a 2-and-2 or a 3-and-3. But when we're looking at teaching, whether you're teaching 1 class, 2 classes, 3 classes, 4 classes, or an overload with 5 classes, the goal has to be you do a good job in every single class. Because that's something where the students that I have in my class don't care what degree I have. They don't care how many children I have. They don't care how many papers I'm working on. They don't care if I have a grant. They want to have a good experience in the class. And that can get hard. I mean, that's where we're back to the question of balance, and then that's where, through the process of reorganization and writing school documents, every school also has to figure out how that can be or should be reflected. Where we're coming back to, there will be sacrifice. I mean, every one of my books has an acknowledgement of my family, and it's not enough.
Were there other suggestions on the panel for how we can demonstrate teaching success when it comes time for promotion and tenure?
Well, I think we need to be careful because we can't do everything, right? We can't be excellent teaching 300 students in a class, as well as working in small seminars, as well as teaching PhD students, as well as, online large sections. So we can't do it all, but if you have, I like to think of it as showing that you're living out your teaching philosophy, right? So we all have kind of those things that are important for us to accomplish through our teaching. And if we kind of stay true to that, that allows us to kind of, I think, focus a little bit more. So we're not just trying to do every single thing, because that becomes really overwhelming, at least it did for me.
And along those lines, then, having a good connection to ultimately your director, who formally is the one who puts the stamp of approval on all the teaching assignments, try to figure out what's a good teaching assignment for you. In my first tenure track job, the idea was you teach a 4-and-4, you publish papers, you write grants, and then maybe you get tenure. And my department chair said, look, I'm going to give you 2 classes, business calculus back to back, and that's half your teaching load right there. And that made me very effective in those classes. So it could be that you want to have a certain amount of repetition built in. It may be that you need to teach a certain upper level undergraduate or beginning graduate class because that would potentially train graduate students who could work for you. These are the kinds of discussions you would want to have with somebody who makes the decisions, because if you're in a field where you're depending on needing graduate students to work with you and all you ever teach is a 200 level service class, your recruitment pool is different from someone who always gets to cherry pick.
I would say too, back to that original question of, unless I made this up, how annual evaluations serve you as you work towards tenure and promotion. So I would just say make sure that there's no huge discrepancy between what you think happened and what the committee says happened. These are things that I've served at the college level, looking at tenure and promotion dossiers, and we look at the annual evaluations. We look at them because they speak to the evolution of the candidate and how feedback was given to oneself and through the committee and then applied. And so, again, if you taught a certain level of classes and that's not reflected, or you felt your research was much more impactful, but that the committee didn't get it, I think that's when it's worth, more than a score or anything like that, going in and talking to whatever evaluation committee was elected, your governance, and just saying, it's really important that you understand it, it's really important that it's reflected here. I think that's something worth making sure. Just double checking the facts.
So I'm hearing there the idea of taking the annual review very seriously, in
For sure.
the sense of reading what the personnel committee or the director has written and thinking carefully about that and responding to it.
I think just to make sure that it's a difference of opinion is fine, but just feel like the information has integrity, if that makes sense. That the perspectives on what you do and the impact of what you do isn't too far off.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you go up for tenure, there's not this unnecessary argument with the people that you work with every day about what you've done and why it's important.
Could I add something on all of this? So, I mean, one of one way to think about this is you're putting together a portfolio, which again means you choose what to do. That also means though that if for some reason you have lower evaluation scores than you or your department would like, or if there's some kind of weakness, unlike perhaps a portfolio, in your annual review or in your documents, you want to kind of address that. So let's say you were teaching a Monday, Wednesday, Friday section of a GEC course, and then it was on Tuesday, Thursday. So that required redesign and adjustments, and then you had to do online and then an intersession, right? So it may not be readily apparent, it just looks like you're teaching the same course, but if there are extenuating circumstances, especially within the academy, bring those up. Or if you are worried about your teaching evaluations in general and you think they might be hurting you long term, then think, okay, how can I either, one way is you can generate more student feedback by having an anonymous Canvas survey. And so that way, if you only have 1 or 2 semesters worth of teaching evals, but you kind of want a little bit more, that's still kind of good data, then you could do that. Or you can say, my evals aren't where I wanted, and that's why I've started to do AQ. So I mean, there's also something to be said for addressing weaknesses that you perceive. Don't panic and definitely don't hide them. Just sort of say, okay, this is not where I want it to be, especially when you're at the annual evaluation stage, and these are some of the reasons that you may not realize, and these are some things I'm trying to do to address it.
That's a great point. Go ahead.
With the teaching, that's another kind of way of thinking about it is what can I do for improving teaching, and that's participation in workshops. I know when I first started teaching, I went and looked for others that were doing what I was doing, not necessarily on campus, but outside campus, and got very involved in a society that focuses on teaching anatomy and physiology, and I'm very much involved in that, going to workshops and presenting and more involved. So there are, and we have it on campus as well. You mentioned the AQ, which is our kind of pedagogy and teaching workshops, and there are ways that you can do that on campus and off campus and have all that documentation that we're talking about. So you're constantly adding to your repertoire of teaching.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to say that the one way to demonstrate teaching success is to demonstrate improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And so using the annual review, maybe using student feedback, thinking about ways of designing a course more effectively in the next semester, and documenting that change might be a way to demonstrate.
Yeah, and I think that suggestion is that it is not the same to teach the course, even from semester to semester. So keeping records of the changes that you make and the improvements that you make is very important.
I think having a little bit of fun with course design too, as much as you can. That was when, so I'm a licensure supervisor, and I always say that to my students during student teaching, this is your soft place to fall. Make huge mistakes, make worthy mistakes, learn, learn, learn. And I would say, they're working with actual humans in student teaching, so there is a limit to how much they can mess around, but it is the chance to kind of get your feet set and figure out who you are in the classroom. And I would say that was true for me here the first 2 or 3 years, is that I really experimented with how much can my classes be interactive and not go too far, or how much can we integrate getting out into the community, but still keep a sense of what we're trying to do. And just keeping it creative. I think teaching is a creative process, and if you get bored in the classroom, that's a sign that you're getting stagnant. So I think more than just giving our students a good experience, it should be interesting for you too.
That's a very good point.
And something that you want to do. And so I guess that's what I would say is don't be shy about experimenting with how you want to teach. It is an individual thing. Yes, you're a performer, an artist, the queen or the king of your classroom, and you should be a presence in there.
Sometimes you can try new things and they don't work.
Yeah.
I'm the queen of that.
Well,
I have a long list of things you can avoid if you want to get in touch with me later.
and of course, here's again where it very much depends on the culture of your school as to how far you can go with that. I mean, what I tell my faculty typically, if they want to turn their class around, you teach it in a different way and it doesn't work, there's a bad evaluation, we know why, we know we have to reassess and all that, that's not a problem. It becomes a problem when you keep redesigning that every semester and 4 semesters in a row, nothing works. I mean, that's when you have to have, that's when your director has to have a meeting with you to say, look, tried and true, just get one done where things work, right?
And if you tell students this is an experiment, it may work, it may not. I found that they actually play along more nicely.
Like it.
And then you have them fill out an anonymous, write a paragraph at the end for my own feedback. What should I change next semester? They'll actually, I found they have a lot more respect for you if you just sort of go in with a little bit of humility saying this could fail. And then they try a little bit harder to actually make it work. And then again, you have now more documentation of, oh, I really liked that thing we did that day, you know?
I mean, think about even this, like, I'm excited for the end part when it's a little bit more interactive because nobody wants a sage on a stage. That's boring.
Well, unless it's me, of course.
Or me.
A few more minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. Switching gears to the category of research or creative activity, many tenure and promotion documents outline minimum expectations in the category of research or creative activity, and I was looking at one that says something like at least 5 substantial peer-reviewed articles in nationally recognized journals. That's just one example. It's a lot of room in there for interpretation. What's the panel's advice for faculty in interpreting those kinds of minimum expectations for tenure and promotion?
You want to know what your colleagues think is, what they consider that. And I know before I was getting close, and I wanted more than the minimum because I thought if they're going to argue over one, I want another one to be right there. Like I'm never a just do the minimum. I'm like, let's have more so that if there's a problem with one, they'll like the others. But I literally sat down with some of the people that I knew would be on my committee, or I went to them and said, hey, there's this 2-page innovative kind of thing. It's a down and dirty. I think I could get it done. I didn't. But anyway, I did ask before I did it, would you consider this as that? Now, there's nothing in writing, but I wanted to get a feel for what my colleagues thought was acceptable because they're the ones that are going to ultimately make that decision, that review committee. And so I did approach them with that and asked them about that before I did it. So to me, that's helpful to know what they consider substantive, because there's even a dialogue about whether a textbook written in nursing is equivalent to a peer-reviewed journal article. So I had to know, and I will tell you that it varies depending on who you talk to the authors or to the authors of textbooks or not. But I did involve them in some of my decisions to make sure that, because I didn't have time to waste.
And a lot of this really depends on your discipline, and that may then also be something that would be worth communicating in your cover letter. I mean, so I learned through serving on a college tenure and promotion committee that a conference publication, which in mathematics is basically, usually if you go to the conference you want to publish a paper, there is a referee process, but you usually get it. Is different in computer science, where there are certain conferences where if you can publish in that conference, that's equivalent or better than publishing in a top journal. And so if you're in the situation where you're in one of those, you definitely are at risk of somebody saying, yeah, but it's just a conference publication. So then you really need to express that coordinate system to whoever reads it to say, yes, this is one of so and so many conference publications, but this one is big.
And again, get that in your annual evaluation, get that understood from the start, build that into the foundation of your progress.
Maybe something that the letter says this was a really good publication. The other part that you have to understand without fretting too much about it really is the culture of your school. We're talking a lot right now about these guidelines, and I'm always mildly entertained because I'm in charge of mathematics, physics, and chemistry, which are arguably the most exacting disciplines in the sciences that you can have. And our evaluations are, about 1 a year. If it's a little bit less than in a year, okay. If it's more than 1 in a year, it might still not be that good because it might be bad journals or something like that. There are huge discussions as to what is a good journal, what is a bad journal. I mean, I work in a small field where Citations, therefore, because the field is small, are not that high. So if you judge me by H index, I'm at best second tier. And when I publish in the top journal in my field, that's also not considered a first tier journal in mathematics. It just happens, right? But if you're in an area where people really say you must have one a year and it can't just be on average, it's really got to be one per calendar year, yeah, I would hope that we can get away from that, but it is what it is, and as long as it's on the books, we're bound by it.
So I'm hearing then, make sure that we understand what the guidelines actually mean. And so where there is language to interpret, we maybe need to get some advice about how to interpret substantial, how to interpret nationally recognized. So those kinds of questions. And maybe be prepared to make a case, both at the annual review level and then at the dossier level.
Mm-hmm. And again, if you've got independent data that shows what the standards of your discipline is, that's really good too. About 15 years ago, somebody analyzed the mathematics database that writes reviews of all the articles that were published in journals of any note at all. And they brought out publication statistics. This is how much mathematicians publish per lifetime. And that's really good, because then if your number is X and that X is already in the so and so many as lifetime percentile, hoping that you're not at the end of said lifetime, then that's a good thing to show people.
And for nursing, we don't have a lot of journals with, every journal doesn't do an impact factor, and yet one of the things you'll be asked to do is include on your CV when you publish your impact factor. So we had to write in there and show that our discipline is fairly new into that, and we don't have a lot of journals with impact factors. And I put the email where one journal said, and it's a peer-reviewed journal, we don't do impact factors, here's our success rate. I included that email with that article so that they would know that this is what is the issue. Because like the biological sciences have lots of impact factor.
Speaking of those things, that touched a nerve on something else, but one of the things that are new for USM is that letters from external evaluators will be strongly recommended if you choose to be evaluated under the new guidelines, where I think your cohort is still under the bridge policy. You can choose whether you want to be evaluated via the old process or the new process. But having some folks in mind that could serve as external evaluators if you go in that direction, that's pretty natural actually, and it's definitely legitimate. I mean, when I was always at institutions where that was required, and so you look at really strong people in your field that have seen you present, that you're pretty sure have read your papers, as long as they're not collaborators in case there are certain exclusionary causes. Those are really good people to have in mind, and if you see them at a conference, you might just say, hey, would you be willing if I suggested your name?
Great. How about we start to take some questions from the audience and see the kinds of things that you all are interested in hearing from us about.
But still, and I think too, we can't, I mean, in academia, it's so strange that you are, achieve anything at the 6-year mark that's permanent at all, because in a normal job, you have to prove yourself all the time. There is no such thing as hitting a certain place and you're good to go. So that was my comment, right? If you suck, you should be fired. And it was just like a way to cut to the chase of saying, you know, in any work that you do, you're going to have certain measures that you need to achieve. And I think in higher ed, it's really great because it's very specific, like a whole group of people within the discipline that you love decided exactly what you needed to do, exactly how you need to present it in dossier form, exactly how it's going to be approved on the way up. So there's not a lot of mystery, whereas in other fields there can be. And the institution also really works hard to protect unintentional bias, discrimination of any kind, right? So you get a fair shake. But I would say, you know, in some ways we're advantaged with the way it's set up.
I would do it again. I mean, as
Oh, yeah.
stressed as I was, I would do it again because professionally, the growth that occurred, because oftentimes if you're not forced to do things, you don't. And here, there wasn't an option. I had to publish. I had tried many publications at another university. We never got it off the ground, but it was a different university. It wasn't a research university, and teaching was the primary focus there. But I would do it again. I would do it again if, just because of the growth that came, I did things I had never done before, so.
No, I mean,
Go.
one of the things I try to do is use different pieces of my life to kind of offset the stress of the others. So like when you leave work, it's so nice to just leave work and go home and be with your people, or, you know, people outside of the academy. And then when the stresses of that come back, it's always nice to be like, I'm going back to work, you know? And so
Yeah,
I
that's
sort
really
of
true.
occasionally, both aspects will be stressful at the same time, and those are always difficult weeks. But it's amazing how, if you're just present where you are, like if you're at work, be at work, right? I try, I love my colleagues, but I just say, all right, now, come on, like I gotta get some stuff done. And then when I'm with people who aren't in the academy, I try to just be with them. And the worst is when you have guilt in both spots, right? And so it's hard to accomplish, but ideally it's like, I'm here, I'm doing the work, and then I'm gonna put it down, and then I'm gonna go be with these other people, and I'm gonna be with them. And then, you know, not that we can always accomplish that, but there are ways to sort of use the advantages and disadvantages of each to offset one another.
I mean, ultimately, in some ways, the key to happiness, I think, is to know who you are, to know who you want to be, and then reconcile with the fact that the two will be different. And in some cases, if the difference is too large, if this is permanently stressful, then maybe the fit is just not there. So in my second job, I had a conversation with my academic director, direct supervisor, and it was early on, and I said, so I have 6 years to get tenure. And he looked me straight in the eye and said, oh no, if things don't work out, we have you out of here in 3. And yeah, I felt really good. But then he also explained, and he said that he had worked with somebody for whom academia simply was not a fit. And it was still a challenging process, but they identified it, and he wrote recommendations for industry positions, and that person made the transition and turns out to be a lot happier now than this person would have been in academia. So this is where if self-image is too far removed from actuality, that's where a lot of strange things can happen. I mean, I'm originally from Germany. I started out as a physics major. I still have the self-image of myself competently in Germany in a physics lab doing just really cool stuff with helium bags and stuff like that. I suck at that stuff and I would hate doing it, but for some reason it's a really cool picture. And thankfully I'm not trapped in it. But if this is something where, if this job permanently stresses you out, then maybe there's something else going on.
I'll say too, on the heels of that, I clearly am, I'm not good at politics. It's not a part of how I'm built. I say inappropriate things often, in the service of humor, and for remembering that that my favorite part of the job is actually the people that I'm working with, right? So this is the kind of thing that gets me excited more than doing anything else. And so I would say that at USM I found that to be true, is that there is space to sidestep some of the politics that entrench other institutions, and the more collaboration you do, the better. But you do have to have a thick skin. It's constant constructive criticism, which is good.
So we still have a few minutes for other questions from the audience. Nothing too small.
Co-teaching or being listed, even if you're not co-teaching, both being listed in SOAR. I'm a little, so in English, we didn't do our annual reviews through digital measures yet, so I haven't put everything there. And I'm a little concerned in the future about digital measures just kind of going in and taking data and, you know, me not, even if I have a note somewhere saying, not all of these evaluations are mine, some of them belong to my colleague, you know what I mean? I'm concerned about things like that because I know that the people who are looking at these have a lot to go through and something like that can get skimmed over. So I'm wondering about all of like that, something like that, you know, or another thing that might seem small but would make a big difference, and how digital measures
I co-taught a class and my evaluations were separate from the other person's evaluations.
Yeah, mine were not. They showed up with the same, and I know that's happened for colleagues in English as well.
We did something in dance because we're not doing it currently, but we would split the semester so that we basically, like, if we have an intermediate and a beginning class, and like we switch halfway through so the students are getting different teachers, and so that complicated our process, right? Because like if Julie and I were teaching this class, but then in the semester it puts a survey about the students might not even know which one of us they were evaluating, and so you could do something then supplemental, where what we did was we had our administrative specialists come in at that midway point and give us our own survey on that and said, this is for Kelly, please fill this one out for Kelly, or please fill out this one for Julie. So that's one way that we did that, but I think there's other ways you could do a supplemental survey that then you would include in your documentation, either with digital measures or something, so then you feel like you have data that might not be there, but you could put it there. It would be easy to spot.
Yeah, and I guess I would add, so I've been on the other side of the table as a chair and member of a personnel committee, and being in a dean's office and looking at evaluations, that the situation you're describing happens all across campus, and the people who are reading them understand that in some cases students don't differentiate between different instructors in front of a class, and that your success either in annual review or in tenure promotion is not going to hinge on an evaluation in a single course in a single semester. And so some of that work you can do by, you know, maybe providing an additional opportunity for students to give feedback. Some of it you can address in the narrative, and then some of it will just be addressed by having readers who are careful. And
is the narrative really the best spot to include notes like that?
yes, if there's something that requires that kind of discussion. Now, if you get if there's a student comment that says, you know, so-and-so is my instructor was really terrible, and you were one of 2 instructors, or in one of those classes in English, I know it's got 3 instructors in it. No way of knowing who that is that the student was referring to. You don't need to address that in the narrative, I don't think. But if there's something really significant that you want to address in the narrative, that would be the place to do it. Otherwise, I think it's going to be fairly clear that something is co-taught. You can make notes in the dossier itself.
Eric, here's where we're also transitioning to different formats, and in the old paper format you were also able to write a bit of explanation within your volume too. Maybe that's why my dean thought I thought about these things, but because you mentioned the possibility of skimming over things, I've reviewed some things where I would contact the applicant and say, hey, what happened in such and such semester? Things are different. And it was, yes, somebody left on Friday, we had to start teaching the class on Monday, and so I was drafted into a class that's totally out of my area, but I stepped up to the plate, and results were that the class got taught, but not to this colleague's usual standards. And after that, I realized that, yeah, that was also in the narrative. It's just that it's a lot of information to process. So putting a comment into a marked up PDF could help there too, because you're supposed to submit all your annual evaluations, not your student teaching evaluations, and then putting a little comment in there that this class was co-taught with such and such.
Just making sure it's clear.
Just that can probably help a lot, because then the information is right there. I mean, then it gets really hard to overlook it, especially when you put it in red.
That's what I was gonna suggest.
My default font for markups is red because I grade papers in Acrobat too.
Anything extreme, good, bad, or otherwise, is going to get a closer look at every level, right? If it's just glowing, I'm just going to go, well, why? How does this matter within this field? Why did they think it was so fantastic? I need to understand that. And same thing with anything that's, worrisome. And so that would be ruled out right away.
Yeah. So
Be like,
I mean, don't
fret about that.
don't respond to every verbal comment. That would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Kind of
wasn't
I'm
implying
telling
that
ya.
the other
Yeah.
instructors had poor.
Right, yeah.
I just meant that I didn't want it all to be all together as one, but we all did well, so that's good.
Yeah.
So, can you just clarify, we spent a lot of time talking about the narrative that goes for tenure, but then I know in some units, every annual evaluation, you also write a narrative. Does those annual narratives also go in this bigger narrative, or what happens to those narratives, or do they count? Or is it only like your chair or director's evaluation?
So that when you get your annual review every year,
Mm-hmm.
that is going to go in your dossier.
The letter you had back.
The narrative that
the
you
class.
wrote will not.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
you might want to use that to write the actual tenure and promotion narrative that you write, but each one of those individual annual essays that you wrote are not going to go
Gotcha, okay.
into the dossier. Kelly, you were.
Yeah, I was thinking about when I did my first dossier, I did pull from that sometimes because I wrote a lot of reflection and I was trying to show that. So in my volume 2, I pulled from that. So like I've written about teaching in over 6 years and I pulled my narrative from each of those and used that as a part of the evidence for what I was doing too. So I think it just depends how you want to go on it. In my going up for full promotion, I was like, oh, that was too much. Why did you do that? So I didn't take it there. But at the time when I did it, it made sense for me in terms of justifying the way that I wanted to prove what I had done. So I don't think you throw them away, but it also there's a reminder of what you were thinking that helps you frame your narrative. And yeah, that narrative too helps in the person who's evaluating that's giving you that score back write those things. They're working in conjunction, so it's not going to get lost.
I think the more your work grows and is recognized externally by the field, the less that essay is important. Like for tenure and promotion, my essay I think was like 8 pages. It was ridiculous. But I was trying to, I had to contextualize what I was doing. I was really different from my own department as well as doing something different in the field. And then for full professor, it was 1.5 pages. Because my research was established beyond the institution, beyond it was vetted elsewhere, so less was necessary.
I was also going to add, as I was thinking about all those students, it can seem really scary that all these people are going to look at your course evaluation, look at all these things. It is scary, but also they're being evaluated by people who've already gone through that process too. So there is a sense of like, you need to trust them, and they're not going to flip through and be like, oh, that year she got that one nasty remark from that student. Well, I'm going to, this is it, you know. Because you're going to have a student every once in a while. We had a student, Nance, who like, he was just mad at everybody, so he went through and docked every single person that he came in contact with. It didn't matter what we'd done, you know. And that's going to happen, but if that seems an abnormality, it's not going to spark their attention. So in lots of ways, you have to trust all, it is anxiety driven, but you also have to trust in the people who are going through it, and trust in your mentors, and trust that there's a lot of people who can help you out. And even sometimes going to somebody outside your discipline could be a good practice too, to see like, you know, if you're in education, you're like, hey Kelly, can you read this from your perspective? Do you understand the language I'm using here? That might also be another checkpoint for you, just to make sure that then when you got to that college level that you knew you had adapted your language for that general population.
I like doing that all along the way. Like all the data-driven colleagues that I have, where you have to prove it, right? And then they come to me for the more creative side of things. And it's nice that, again, a different form of collaboration happens in the area of feedback for these important things. And the last thing I wanted to throw in about kind of sticking things in folders was one of the things I did getting towards that essay that felt really overwhelming to sum up, like, what is the meaning of life, who is God, write who you are on a piece of paper, professionally, was for the major things that I did in terms of course design, service, or research along the way. I just wrote like 3 to 5 sentences. This is why it matters. This is where I hope it goes from here. And then it was like putting together an outline when I got to that place, and it was a lot easier than trying to remember or sift through all the narratives that I had written along the way.
Well, I want to thank the panelists. We are out of time, and thank you all for your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
And do you have a couple housekeeping notes?